partly been inspired by a petition for social conduct or for inclusive activity that's been promoted by some other astronomers that I didn't know. So I'm starting here with a photograph of my working at an observatory, preparing for a project at the time when I was promoting a lot of to have the observatory perform exoplanet transit observations. And a little while after, putting in a lot of time and a lot of sacrifice, I had an experience that I need to bring up as a research subject. I appreciate all the talk of inclusion, and I've been required to not just research astronomy, but in order to continue research astronomy, to research how to overcome anti-inclusion, actual behavior of organizations, collaborations being hostile to inclusion. And so I'm giving this talk on my efforts to try to find ways of getting around it and return to the project that I was doing. So in 2005, I had an appointment from 2005 to 2008. It only lasted until 2007. I was the first astronomer at a major, it's become a fairly prominent observatory. They have a booth today. And I was instrumental in getting that observatory to study exoplanets as one of their main programs, and that for a global network, that it would be ideal to be a way of testing the new telescopes. As part of doing that, not only did I start the first transit observations, but I passed around, I started writing about the network. I was the originator of doing a paper on the new global observatory, and using the writings that I had prepared for members of the group to give talks on the observatory. So I've had a conundrum for a job search. How do I handle the ADS showing we have 0 papers? Because when I was suddenly terminated for, it was actually an incident of gaslighting, I was disinvited from being on the paper, given 0 credit. And so that's why I'm bringing this to an education sort of thing. Had wonderful presentations on positive ideas, but I think there's actually even been a few allusions to when there's negative anti-inclusive actions. So I'm asking the community to help with providing pathways to push through hostile barriers. I've heard barriers being mentioned. So far I haven't named the observatory, because some people say that that's improper in a negative thing, but on my CV I list that I work at the Las Cruces Observatory Global Telescope, or LCOGT, sometimes they say LCO. I was actually instrumental in trying to avoid the confusion with the earlier LCO observatory. I have to list that, so I'm mentioning my name, SF Taylor, that when I apply for jobs, I say that I was the original first author on the paper of the Las Cruces Observatory. And so, also, since I wasn't allowed to review the text, I reject the peer review. And so I'm making the point that for honest peer review, legitimate peer review, that the first stage of peer review obviously is through the authors. Okay, this slide here, this shows that I actually was a part of the observatory. A coworker made a very charming business card for me. This was cited as a reason to force me out, when actually the leadership of the observatory had a very joking culture. So this was one of several false pretenses So real peer review must include all the authors. And by all the authors, I mean anybody who's substantially contributed to the project, who's done prior writing, because the author lists on papers, they're an experimental result, an observational result, just like the rest of the paper. And on science papers, one of the worst things that can be done is to have a contrived result. You don't want to say, we're going to find a planet around that particular star. We're going to find, you have to actually go and see what happens. The author list is the same way, and the results are used in job searches. And so I'm saying that these exoplanet papers, and I'm particularly highlighting the network paper, that's a contrived result to keep one person out. And as such, the journals should not call that a peer-reviewed paper. I'm presenting that the only way I see it correcting this is to go through the ABS and to require to have the ABS put up ways of challenges to the peer-reviewed papers. And this should apply for a lot of things, such as someone who doesn't want to put their name on a paper for some scientific disagreement, thinks a scientific result is a problem, but still wants to have some credit, still wants to perhaps have a version. And so I'm wanting to submit to the ABS that these sorts of things need to be presented when the journal doesn't handle it. And yes, it will require a certain amount of resources to adjudicate how legitimate somebody's claim, but I think it's pretty obvious, given the effort and years that I put in to help to be part of the Las Cumbres Observatory paper, several papers, that I am due authorship. And that when I apply for jobs, even though I disagree with the final text of the outcome, I put my name on, and I want to say publicly, when I apply to you as the community, that I am an author, even if my name is not listed. So that's my solution. I'd appreciate responses on how to handle this. I appreciate the efforts to have a petition on social conduct and group collaborations, because one of the things I've tried to do is to go to collaborators and ask, can you help me go around the observatory, can you give me alternate data? And people are kind of made awkward by this situation. But I'm sure that this happens in education where people are trying to be kept out. So it's a social research to figure out how to go around it. So I mentioned the petition. I'm asking the TESS and Kepler collaborations to give support for validating the peer review of the papers and to find ways of, like the follow-up program being run by TESS and Kepler, that needs to, when people submit data, they need to honestly include all the contributors to producing that data. And if there's a discrepancy in reality, if there's a complaint, the IPAC follow-up office should not simply accept the person who has access to the data. And unfortunately, when I try to talk to other Las Cumbres colleagues, they say they can't do anything, but I think in the final analysis, to have a legitimate peer-reviewed paper, the authors need to find ways of including me. But obviously, this puts low-level postdocs, graduate students in an impossible situation. And so I'm asking you as the community to address this in a way that can be handled better. A consequence of what's happened is the major discovery that I made has been ignored. I'll give a talk tomorrow afternoon. Thank you, Jason Wright, for the wonderful tool of the exoplanets.org. Okay, so this is, I appreciate community support. Thank you.